Welcome, and again, my name is Stephen Bowe, this year's president. We're going to just go ahead and jump in here to our guest speaker. Ken Riley was born and raised in Southern California, my own hometown. And in 1996, he joined the United States Navy and relocated to Bremerton, Washington, where he presently resides. Ken is a community leader, serving as one of the lead pastors at New Life Church on the peninsula, as well as adjunct faculty at Northwest University in Kirkland, Washington. He is also a board member of Catalyst Public Schools in Bremerton and Sports Beyond of Kitsap County. Ken holds a Master of Divinity from Seattle University and Bachelor of Arts degree in Organizational Leadership from Chapman University. He is currently pursuing a doctorate degree in intercultural studies from Fuller Theological Seminary. Ken has been married to his wife, Kimberly, for over 20 years, and they have 3 wonderful teenage daughters. So please give it up for Ken Riley.
Good morning to all of you, and thank you so much, Steve, for that wonderful introduction. One of the things I want to highlight from the intro is 3 teenage daughters. And so this COVID season has been pretty fun as we wake up every day and they have nowhere to go. And so we've been really navigating this as a family, and so happy to be here. Thank you so much for this invitation to share. And I think this is a subject, as many of you have already articulated, number one, that's important. Number two, it's not going away. And this is a conversation I think we need to learn as leaders, as humans, as members of society, on how to build the capacity to have these conversations. And so I think we have the right goal today. I think we have the right objective to understand that this conversation around race relations is not going anywhere. And then secondly, business leaders, workplace managers, at whatever capacity of leadership and influence you have, we must build the capacity to have these crucial conversations about our differences. And not only how these differences divide us, have this potential to divide us and has divided us, but how these differences actually can be appreciated and honored, and we can work together to move up towards the path of racial reconciliation and healing in our nation. And so I think everybody on this call has a wonderful challenge and a wonderful opportunity. It's a paradox, because I think all of us have an opportunity to provide leadership, specifically in the area of race. And so right out the gate, I want you to think of yourself as a pioneer on the front line, stepping up to the challenge to say, you know what, I want to take an active role in this conversation and build a capacity that allows unity and oneness in the areas that I have influence, and also speak out against those things that are unjust. And so right away, I just want to say, thank you for being here, and thank you for saying yes to the challenge and awesome responsibility to provide leadership specifically in this area. So for a few moments, as we look at building capacity, I see this conversation and our time together just kind of going down 2 paths. The first path will be, how do we lay the foundation? I think there are some truths that we need to agree on. There has to be a foundation that we agree on in order to build upon the necessary framework needed for this capacity. And so we'll kind of talk about what's the foundation of this conversation? What are the ground rules of this conversation? And then some practical steps that you can implement instantly in your workplace, your sphere of influence, in your family, even in your own heart, regarding this area of race relations. And I know all of us are at some level on some sort of a pendulum or a continuum around this issue, through story, through upbringing, whatever, fill in the blank. Something has informed your current view of this issue. And so it's my hope that that current view has increased capacity that moves towards racial reconciliation. And so what's kind of the first ground rule I think we have to be crystal clear on as we build capacity to lead in this area of race relations and to start this conversation? The first thing we have to agree on is that racism is wrong. Racism is wrong. You go back to the Declaration of Independence, and I quote, it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, even not all women, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." And so based upon the Declaration of Independence, all of who I am and all of who God has created me to be, or the Creator as you define has created you to be, that should not have any persuasion on the rights or my pursuit of happiness. And so racism is a direct attack on the unalienable rights that I have based upon the color of my skin. And if you look at the definition of racism, it's crystal clear that this is an attack on what our nation stands for. Just Webster says racism is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. And so before I tell you my story, before you tell me your story, before I know your background, before I know what you believe, what you think, just based upon how you look, there is a pecking order established. Racism says just based upon your look, the way where you come from, your ethnic background, there is a tipping point, and that's not what we signed up for as a nation. Another definition I came across with racism is the belief that a particular race is superior or inferior to another, that a person's social and moral traits are predetermined by his or her inborn biological characteristics. That is profound, that you would judge me and I would judge you based on something that I could not control. And we see how divisive racism has been throughout the inception of our nation. And this pursuit of equality, this pursuit of happiness, this pursuit of racial reconciliation, oh, by the way, all of us are responsible for at some level, especially if you are a leader in the business community. You're on the front line. Taking the Declaration of Independence also with those definitions of racism, I think Nelson Mandela puts a cherry on the cake for us when he says this around racism. He says, no one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin, or because of his or her background, or because of his or her religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite of hate. And that's where we need to go as we build our capacity as leaders in our community, understanding that this natural tendency for us to love one another is pretty much the only thing that's going to allow us to walk hand in hand, arm in arm, to push back the darkness of racism and social injustice that has plagued our communities, and I would add for far too long. And so as we take this challenge, number one, we have to understand that racism is wrong. Now, again, one of the things I've been encouraged by my white brothers and sisters is this shift that I'm seeing specifically around racism. Now, the average person I've been talking to typically would say, I'm not a racist. You know, I have African-American or Black family members, etc., friends. But there is another layer that I'm finding my white brothers and sisters and others actually declare openly based on this stance that racism is wrong. I'm seeing a shift from people saying, I'm not just a racist, but I'm actually an anti-racist. There's a subtle shift from just saying, well, I'm not a racist, to declaring I'm an anti-racist. What's the difference? You're no longer silent. What's the difference? You're no longer afraid to lean into the challenge of providing leadership in this area within the sphere of influence that you currently lead and serve in. And so it's my hope that as we continue to build this capacity with this foundation, there can be a shift from just saying, hey, I'm not racist, I'm in my own bubble, I do my thing, I have African-American, Black family members and friends and vice versa, to saying, no, this is wrong. A second thing that we have to understand as we lead from the platform that racism is wrong is we have to understand our history as a nation. One of the things that I've been really learning in this season is this issue of slavery and race relations. It's been a thread throughout our history. This isn't anything brand new. This isn't something that just happened as we just woke up. It's not a result of COVID-19. This is something that has been an issue from the inception of our nation. And I was just looking at some key dates in our nation, specifically around this issue. In 1865, we had the Emancipation Proclamation. 1964, Civil Rights Act, where we had the Jim Crow laws in the South. 1965, we had the Voting Rights Act, where certain people couldn't even vote. Just think about that. Within 100 years, from 1860, you would think from 1865 to 1965, we would have this under control. From the abolition of slavery, all the way 100 years later, in 1965, you would think, hey, we pretty much got this thing. No, actually, it didn't even really start. The fight didn't even start until 100 years later. And we're almost seeing another 100 years where we're still on this fight. So our history is key as we look at this issue. I want to share a picture real fast relative to our history. And it's a picture that it's asking me to all these preferences. Let's see. Okay, there we go. You know what? I may not be able to do it. Something happened with my Zoom. And so oh, there we go. I was able to get it to work. All right, technology didn't fail me. Or I didn't fail the technology. There's a picture I want to share of my family. I'm an only child, and so this picture, I represent the 5th generation of my family, and so I'm with my great grandma Betty. If you're looking at the picture, she's to the right. Above her is my great grandma Pauline. There's my mom, and then sitting right next to me on the other side is my grandma. And this, I represent the 5th generation. And let's just get the obvious thing out of the way. That suit that I'm wearing, come on, are you kidding me? That's I love that suit. I wish I still had that suit. And there's a lot of history relative to this issue in my family. My great grandma Betty, whose lap I'm sitting on, is the descendant of a slave and the master. You can tell kind of by the fair color of her skin, she's mixed race. Her father was the slave owner and her mother was a slave. And so she was a byproduct of that relationship, who then had my great grandma Pauline, who also kind of grew up picking cotton, that whole era, has my grandma who grew up right prior to that, also picked cotton. And then my mom, who grew up in the civil rights movement. My mom was 12 years old when Martin Luther King got assassinated. And so now that I come on the scene and I show up in your business establishment, I show up in the community, I have this narrative, I have this history where I can trace back. I don't even have to go all the way back to my great grandma Betty. I can go 2 generations, perhaps even in my mom's generation, and trace how much this has been an issue in this nation. And I would just invite you to just look back 5 generations and see if you can see if racism somehow influenced or was a part of or was around or helped shape whatever your family system is. You can just trace back generations and see that this is an issue. So as a business leader, and I show up, or as an employee, or as somebody in your circle of influence, I show up, you don't even know that I have this history. And I don't even know that you have your history. And so I have to have this awareness as I build capacity that says, hey, you know what? This person has a story. Ken has a story. Ken has a history. And it's like Nelson Mandela says, if we can honor and appreciate that and provide space for that dialogue, we can get to a place that says, hey, we're both human and we have the opportunity to course correct an issue that's been going on since the inception of our history. I want to share another picture relative to our history with you real fast. This is a picture of the door of no return. I had the opportunity last year, I've been twice to Dakar, Senegal. The church that I'm a part of, we partner with a school there to provide education. And this place that I'm at is called Gorée Island. Gorée Island was one of 3 major slave trade hubs in West Africa. Millions of slaves were kind of traded and shipped off from this port. This door of no return is kind of in a long corridor where they actually have slave chambers where they would hold them and then release them and then chain them and send them out this door. And it was called the door of no return by the native people because when they came through that door, they were not returning home. And with probably over the last maybe 100 years or so, there would still be sharks that swam around this area because a lot of the slaves would just jump off and kill themselves because they didn't want to get on the boat. And so the sharks would come and then, feast on those poor people that jumped over the edge there. And so they that was the tour guide was telling us the sharks just now over like the last 100 years stopped patrolling this area. And so that's just as it was. And if I stood in that door, I had some other pictures where I actually stood in that door, and you can just feel the souls and the cry of these people. And if you talk about slavery and the slave trade on that side of the pond in Africa where it happened, for them, it's like yesterday. It's not an issue that we need to get over. It's not an issue that happened and we just read about it. No, it felt real to them because one reason is there is a mixed race of people that live on that island today that are between the natives and the slave traders. When they would, offer up the girls, the virgin girls, and they would get them pregnant, they actually begin to have children. And so you have this mixed race on the island that's very, very sensitive and very, very astute to this issue around race. And I share all this to say that if we don't understand our history, then it's hard for us to develop convictions and framework from where we need to go next. And so as dark and ugly as our history can be, I'm hopeful because one of the things that I'm hopeful of 150 years ago, perhaps I'm not even on this call and we're not having this conversation. So I'm hopeful that we're able to have this conversation, understand our history, and move forward to build capacity. So racism is wrong. Learn, understand the narrative of our history, even in your own family story, and that will help shape the platform to continue to build this capacity for this conversation. And so then what does it practically look like for us to build this capacity? The first thing you have to do, if you're taking notes, you can write this down, is you have to acknowledge your track record. Acknowledge your track record. As a leader, as a husband, as a wife, as a sister, brother, family member of society, as a Rotary member, what is your track record around this area of race? When this whole thing happened, I've had a couple of business leaders reach out to me and say, Ken, I want to make a statement. What should I say? I want to make a statement. I want to say, I don't want to be silent. I want to be anti-racist. And I said, okay, great. We began to kind of talk through their mission, their vision, and both of these companies that I were able to, one was a nonprofit, I was able to kind of look through, unpeel all the layers and see, okay, this has been something that you haven't been silent at all, and you've kind of promoted justice all along. So I think it's okay for you to make a statement. Others have had nothing to say. And then they say, well, Ken, should I put a Black Lives Matter banner in my window of my business? It's time out. Not that you have any issues with that or whatever the case may be, but if that has not been in the fabric of who you are as a person and or as an organization, if you make that big of a leap, chances are you won't be able to handle the criticism and or it won't sustain. It'll just be a fad until the smoke settles and then the banner will come down. And so if you're saying, Ken, I have not had a track record in order I haven't been on the front line with this. I don't have a track record that I can say, hey, I've been on the front lines. Your first step then is to acknowledge that you don't have a track record. And that allows you then to invite other voices, to invite other people of color in to help you establish the framework to move forward. Be okay with your track record. And one of the best statements that you can say relative to this issue that does not shut down the conversation, does not shrink your capacity, it actually increases your capacity and starts the conversation, is the phrase, I don't know. I've had to say that as an African-American male, 5 generations, 3 generations back, descendant of a slave, as much expertise and realize and all the things I've had to experience in my life, from being falsely accused and falsely incarcerated, all of these things, I still have to be humble enough to say, I don't know. And when we can get to that posture, acknowledge our track record and say, I don't know, we can then come together and discover answers that can cause us to lead. I think one of the most challenging things as a leader is to say that word, especially to the people that you are leading, because you're looked to as to have, you're the one supposed to have all the answers. You're supposed to have the path, you have the compass, you're the one that's supposed to chart the course. What I think I've learned in this season, I've actually built deeper relationships by starting with the questions versus the answers. And acknowledging our track record allows us not just to have all the answers, but it allows us to ask the right questions to move forward. So you have to acknowledge your track record. The second thing you have to do is you have to engage younger voices. Engage younger voices. I will say this younger generation, probably ages 30 and down. I'm 44, so I think I'm in the upper echelon now, but there's a generation that is behind us that sees this issue of racism in a whole nother light. They go from 0 to 100 and everything in between gets skipped. I'm going to show you one other picture. Last picture that I'll share. This is a picture of my wonderful family. My wife, Kimberly, there with the headband, and then Kaylani, who is 18, getting ready to go to the University of California, Irvine, although they have some COVID things going on. So we're trying to keep her home. And some of you parents who have kids that are taking that step towards leaving a house or going to college know that there are seasons where you're like, get out. And then there are seasons where you're like, don't go. And we're currently in a don't go season right now. So I appreciate your thoughts as we prayers as we navigate that. My daughter, Caitlin, in the back, who is 16, and my youngest daughter, Kalia, who is 15. And when this whole thing with George Floyd happened and the peaceful protests began to happen in Bremerton, my 3 daughters came to me and they said, Dad, we're going to a protest. And I said, no, you're not. You're not going anywhere. I don't say you can't go. And they said, no, well, can't we just go? So they convinced me to go to this protest. And we go to this protest. And we were just going to drive through. But as we drove through, we began to see a whole lot of people that we knew. And so we parked and we got out and we began to, and I went Facebook Live to kind of share my thoughts of kind of what was going on and try to provide leadership. And I hear my daughters chanting, and they didn't ask me what to say. And they didn't ask me, is this politically correct? But they had this cause for justice in their heart that I didn't plant in there. It was innate. And they can't conceive at their age why somebody would not like somebody because of the color of their skin. They can't even wrap their mind around it. And so they've been claiming a voice that I've been really listening to. And a lot of the things you're hearing today is from this generation. I'm doing this thing that I'm calling Game Changers, where I'm actually interviewing. I started with the class of 2020, and now I'll have college students as the next iteration of this. Part of the doctoral work I'm doing, trying to really engage and provide next wave leadership to end racism. And so it's been profound to hear this young generation provide leadership. And so in your sphere of influence, if you have somebody that's a teenager, a millennial, a young adult, just get their view. Say, hey, with all the stuff going on, with the civil unrest in our nation and in our community, what do you think about that? How can we provide leadership? And you will be amazed at what will come out of their mouth. You'll be amazed at how they can engage social media in a way that allows us to provide unity. And so engage those younger voices, and you'll be profound with the capacity that comes as you have this conversation. They'll help you bridge a lot of gaps. Thirdly, build a team. Build a team. The organization I'm a part of, New Life Church, we have something called a unity team, and it's chaired by myself and some other key individuals that are on the front line with this issue. And so the burden doesn't rest on one particular leader. Our job is to create a culture of inclusion. Our job is to provide leadership with regards to our stance as a faith community on this issue, as well as ongoing listening and learning along the way. And so whatever sphere of influence you have, I would say pick 1, 2, 3 people that say, hey, you know what, this is an issue that we want you to stay laser focused on just in case something happens. And I'm seeing businesses, we were at the Kiss That Business Forum, I saw some business owners reach out and say, hey, we started a unity task force, diversity team, whatever you want to call it, to really be laser focused on having these conversations. And at a minimum, this core group of people can facilitate conversation. And just by facilitating conversations in your sphere of influence, you'll be amazed at how your capacity increases. And as you build a team, the last thing I think is key is you have to create a safe space and a safe place. Create a safe space and a safe place. You have to put avenues in place for people of color, all people, to give honest feedback about their experiences. Whether that's a hotline, whether that's an email, whether that's a Facebook group. We started an email where you can email unity@newlife.tv, and you can submit a story. You can say whatever you have to say. We've also started a closed Facebook group by invitation that has ground rules of being a safe place where you can share. Where is it in your own influence that you can have a safe place to share? And because I live with 3 teenage daughters that are on the front line, the first place you can start of making a safe place is your home. Is this conversation around race even safe in your own home? Do you have the capacity to have this conversation, especially if you have a family member or a loved one that sees things differently? How do you even start that conversation? These principles apply at the home as well, so you can increase your capacity to have this conversation. So you have to acknowledge your track record. It's okay wherever you are. There is grace and there's room to grow. We all are growing. Number 2, engage younger voices and know that this young generation, they're not just all out there, but they actually have profound wisdom that can help lead us. Build a team or a coalition that can help you share the weight and share the load as you lean in and provide leadership into this issue. And with that team, help create a safe space and a safe place so you can have honest and open feedback. And I'll end with this. I think as we've already said, and it's been said so well, that this conversation is an important conversation. And this conversation, especially on the front lines of our business leaders and those who have influence in our community, it's something that's not going to go away. And so I just know from my perspective, as I've been so grateful for this opportunity to share, by the way, that my heart is full of joy, because this isn't something that's just being confined to the walls of a faith community. Now, I have to admit, I'm biased. Being a pastor, I believe that the church certainly should be on the front lines in providing leadership in this area. But then I also think that there are other sectors of society that has equal influence or more influence as you interact with families, as you interact in the community. And you can be a champion that says, you know what, I don't have all the answers. However, I've done the hard work, I've done the head work to create the capacity to have a conversation. That doesn't mean we'll always agree. It doesn't mean that we'll leave as friends, but at least we'll be able to share what it is in our hearts. And as we offer that to each other and come from a place of appreciation and humility, I think something special can happen more than not. And so thank you for listening. Thank you for being on the front lines. And I'm just believing, even though we're in a global pandemic and we are in the midst of civil unrest, the best days are ahead of us. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Great. Do we have any questions? If you have a question, please just, you can raise your hand like that and then I'll call on you and you can mute. Okay, let's go with Jim Barker.
Hi, Pastor Ken. Jim,
hey, how's it going, Jim?
From Children of the Nations. I wanted to ask you, for years, the most segregated hour in America is Sunday morning.
Yes, sir.
Are we making progress? Is it changing?
I would say yes. I think it is. I think 2 things I'll say real quickly. One, there's been a real push for, especially from a community of faith, from a Christian perspective, a real push towards multicultural, multi-ethnic ministry. If you look at the narrative of the Bible from the Old Testament all the way to Revelation, you'll see it's been God's plan to have a diverse family. And so if I see the church saying, if we can't get along down here, we're sure going to have a hard time being around each other forever. And so I do see a push. Now, does that mean that every church needs to push towards multicultural diversity? Maybe not. If you're in Harlem or areas that are saturated with a certain people group, I'm not saying that, hey, you know, Harlem needs to be 50% white, or go out to Bainbridge Island and every church now needs to be 50% African American. The demographics can't support that. However, when issues of racial injustice arise, can the leadership and congregants of these churches rise and work together to provide unity? Real quick, being from Southern California, there's a lot of racial tension, not just with Black and white, but also with Black and Hispanic. And we're noticing that through gang violence, the teenagers are killing each other between Black and Hispanic. So the pastor's saying, what do we do? The pastors in the Hispanic community, in the African American community, he said, hey, let's model what it looks like to work together. Then that's able to flow down to the people to provide that leadership. So absolutely, it's getting better, but there is a lot of work ahead of us. But I do see us turning that corner in a healthy way.
Scott?
Ken, are there any books that you personally would recommend that maybe someone like myself, who I acknowledge don't have much of a history or a track record, that would be good for me to read, that would be something that would be beneficial?
Yeah, there's so many books from, Road to Reconciliation to White Fragility. I think the book that I've kind of really landed on in this season is Strength to Love by Martin Luther King Jr.
I've already read that book. It's a good book.
Oh, good. Good. All right.
I did a report when I was in freshman in college on.
Oh, okay. Good deal.
Love that.
That's a good one.
Just love him.
Yeah, that's a good one. And also The Third Way by Miles McPherson.
I haven't read that one.
Yeah, that's a good book as well. It really kind of talks about this. There's another way that promotes to you. You don't have to really pick a side.
Who wrote that book?
Miles McPherson. Yeah, M-I-L-E-S, and then Mick, M-C-P-H-E-R-S-O-N, I think is how you say it, Miles McPherson.
And the title was again? I'm getting old.
The Third Way.
Third Way. Okay, I thought that's what you said. All right, thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Patty, you have a question.
And I've been frustrated lately running up against people that I know well and been so surprised when Black Lives Matter and they come back with All Lives Matter. How do you help them understand the difference between that?
That's a great question. And that's pretty much probably the number one question I get, specifically around Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. I have so much to say, but I'll only say a couple of things real briefly. Number one, somebody told me the other day that they had their mask on and it had Black Lives Matter. And the person said, well, all lives matter. And then she replied, I'm glad we're saying the same thing. So I think at the core of what both of those statements, we're saying the same thing. So let's start there. Now, there are people that in defense of one of the other statements, feel if I say Black Lives Matter, then all lives matter. Certainly that's true. However, we have to understand two things. Number one, if my wife of almost 22 years comes to me and she says, hey, Ken, do I matter to you? And if my response was, well, honey, all wives matter, I would probably be in trouble in the next 20 years. And so what she's saying is there's something going on in me that requires your attention. And I think whether it's all lives matter or Black Lives Matter, blue lives matter, I think we're just asking ourselves, will somebody mourn with me? And so if I say, Black Lives Matter or all lives matter, and I get hit with the response, I slow myself down to say, this person is asking me to mourn with him. And so I'll say, well, tell me more about that. And by the time they peel back the layers of the onion, there's been some sort of loss that they've had to endure. And either statement somehow reminds them of that loss or threatens them of another loss that they will have to suffer. And so at the core of it, I think we're saying the same thing. We need to understand that. That gives us a sense of security in that conversation. And then also ask yourself, does this person need me to mourn with them? Can I mourn with the African-American family whose son got shot? Can I mourn with the police officer who got killed in the line of duty? And if we use that kind of humility, we can get back to that human heart that I think Mandela talks about.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Any other questions there? So I had a question here for you. A couple of years ago, we had an African-American gentleman in our club from another organization. And I went over there to talk to him about our club and joining our club. And I thought, I wanted him to not think that I was talking to him because he was Black.
Okay.
But I was.
Okay. I hear you. I get it. Yeah.
How do we deal with that? Yes, we are trying to recruit a diversity in our club, but at the same time, we're recognizing that we are not as diverse as we would like to be.
I hear you. I think it's back to acknowledging the track record. As an African American, if you came to me and say, "Hey, Ken, this is where we've been, and we want to make a change, and we want you to help shape the future," I think that would be energizing to me. And so it's okay to state your intention, because the African American community can sense whether is this just to check the box, or are you really looking for sustainable change? And if you don't communicate that, then that leaves the guessing game, which will then instantly go to suspicion. And so, yeah, just be clear right up front. Hey, here's our track record. Here's where we want to go, and we want your help to help shape that future and bridge that gap. I think can help make that conversation easier.
Great, that's great advice. Any other questions here? Well, Pastor Riley, thank you very much from everybody here. We really appreciate it. With great words that we all needed to hear, and we really appreciate it. What I would like to do real quick, because we were all listening very intently, is I want to get a screenshot of our attendance here. And so I want to give everybody the opportunity to just smile at their camera instead of looking all serious. And you can wave whatever here. So ready, and hold it for a second because I'm doing a screenshot. 1, 2, 3, cheese.